The boy's hand was small and warm, and Adrian shook it out of habit. Then he felt it, something in the grip, in the way the boy tilted his head, that made the funeral hall tilt too. He didn't know this child. He was certain of that. So why did letting go feel impossible? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Adrian arrived 20 minutes late on purpose. He'd parked 3 blocks away, checked that his collar was up, and walked in after the eulogies were already done. No one needed to see him there. No one needed to wonder why a man like Adrian Voss had come to mourn a woman most of them only knew as a quiet schoolteacher who died too young. He told himself he was there out of respect. He told himself he owed her that much, at least. The funeral hall was small and warm. Lilies on the windowsills. Folding chairs arranged too close together. People clutching paper programs with a photograph of Elise on the cover, her smile gentle, slightly turned to the side, like she was looking at something the camera couldn't see. Adrian didn't take a program. He stood near the back wall and let the quiet wash over him. He was almost ready to leave when a woman crossed the room toward him. She was in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding everything together for days. She introduced herself before he could step aside. Her name was Marisol. She said she was Elise's sister. Adrian shook her hand and said he was sorry for her loss. He meant it. Then Marisol turned slightly and said, "This is my nephew. Eli, come say hello." A boy appeared from behind her. 9 years old, maybe. Small for his age. He was wearing a dark blazer that was just slightly too big for him, the sleeves pushed up at the wrists. He stepped forward and extended his hand the way a child extends a hand when someone careful has taught him how. Adrian shook it. And something happened that he couldn't explain. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a memory. It was more like a pressure behind his chest, sudden and sourceless, the way you sometimes feel a door close in another room before you've actually heard it. He looked at the boy. The boy looked back at him, calm and steady, the way children are calm when they've already survived something big. "Hi," Eli said. "I'm Eli." "Adrian," he said. Then, without meaning to, "Sorry, what did you say your name was?" The boy tilted his head. "Eli." Adrian nodded slowly. He was still holding the boy's hand. He realized it a half-second too late and let go. There was something in the way Eli held himself. Something in the angle of his chin when he looked up. Adrian couldn't name it. He didn't want to name it. He told himself it was the grief of the day, the photographs of Elise everywhere, the lilies. He told himself it was all of that making him strange and soft-headed. He thanked Marisol again. Said the right things. Started toward the door. Across the room, he noticed a woman watching him. She was older, standing slightly apart from the other guests, a glass of water held in both hands. She wasn't crying. She wasn't talking. She was watching Adrian with an expression he couldn't read, not hostile, not warm. Just watchful. Like someone who had been waiting a long time to see what he would do when this moment arrived. He didn't know her. He looked away. He was almost at the door, coat on, 5 steps from the exit, almost free of all of it, when he heard a small voice behind him. "Wait." He stopped. "You knew my mom. Before I was born. Didn't you?" Adrian turned slowly. Eli was standing in the middle of the room, hands at his sides, blazer sleeves still pushed up. He wasn't asking to be cruel. He wasn't asking to trap anyone. He was 9 years old and he'd just buried his mother, and somewhere, somehow, he had decided that this stranger walking out the door mattered. The room had gone quiet around them. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe only Adrian's world had gone quiet. He looked at the boy across 10 feet of borrowed carpet. He thought about saying no. It would have been so easy to say no. Instead, he said nothing at all. And in the silence, Eli watched him with those steady, patient eyes, and Adrian felt the pressure behind his chest again, stronger this time, like something that had been sealed shut for a very long time was just beginning to open. If you felt something watching this story begin, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell us what you think Adrian knows, and what he's afraid to admit. Subscribe for the next chapter. We'll be back soon. Adrian sat in his car for a long time after the funeral ended. He didn't drive. He didn't make calls. He just sat with his hands on the wheel and stared at the street ahead, and tried to figure out why a 9-year-old boy's voice was still echoing in his chest like something thrown into an empty room. "You knew my mom. Before I was born. Didn't you?" He had walked out without answering. He told himself that was the right thing to do. He told himself a lot of things on the drive home that he didn't quite believe. He had loved Elise Marlowe the way you love someone when you're young enough to think love is enough. They had met at a small dinner party, the kind neither of them wanted to be at, and spent the entire evening in the corner of the room talking about nothing important until it was suddenly midnight and the hosts were putting on their coats. He proposed 8 months later. Not with a grand plan. Not with a speech. He'd pulled a ring from his jacket pocket on an ordinary Tuesday evening, in the kitchen of her apartment, while she was making tea. She had laughed. Then cried. Then said yes. 3 days later, she was gone. No note. No call. No message through anyone. He had gone to her apartment and found it empty, not ransacked, not abandoned in a hurry, but carefully cleared. Like she had taken her time. Like she had known. His family hadn't exactly mourned her absence. His mother had used the word relief once, quietly, thinking he couldn't hear. His father had said even less, which somehow felt worse. They had never approved of Elise. She wasn't from the right world, they said. She didn't fit the company name. Adrian had fought them on it, every time, and believed, genuinely believed, that none of that had reached her. That she hadn't known. For 10 years, he'd lived with the version of the story where she simply chose to leave. Where something in her had changed her mind and she hadn't known how to tell him. It was a painful story. But it was one he could carry. He wasn't sure he could carry any other version. He found Marisol outside the hall, stacking folding chairs with 2 other women. She saw him coming and said something quiet to the others, and they stepped away without being asked. I need to understand something, Adrian said. Marisol set down the chair she was holding. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a conversation she didn't want to have. She never contacted me, he said. Not once. 10 years, Marisol. I never got a single word from her. Did you know that? Yes, she said. The word landed flat and simple, and it was worse somehow than if she'd argued. Did she ever ask about me? Marisol looked at the ground. Adrian. I'm not asking to make this harder. I'm asking because she's gone now and I don't have any other way to get an answer. His voice stayed even. He'd spent 20 years learning how to keep his voice even. Did she ever ask about me? Marisol was quiet for a moment. A long moment. The kind where you can see someone deciding how much truth they can afford to give. She asked about you every time I talked to her, she finally said. Up until the end. That hit him somewhere behind the ribs. He didn't show it. Then why didn't she call? Because she was afraid. Of me? No. Marisol shook her head. Never of you. Then of what? Of my family? Because whatever they said to her, it wasn't what they said. Marisol looked up at him then, and there was something in her face, not quite guilt, but close to it. The expression of someone who has been holding a secret so long it has become part of them, and they are only now starting to feel its weight. Adrian, I can't tell you everything. I need you to understand that. There are things that aren't just mine to say. She's dead, he said quietly. Whatever you're protecting. I'm not protecting her reputation. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I'm protecting other people who are still here. He thought of Eli. The blazer sleeves. The steady eyes. He pushed the thought down. Then tell me one thing, he said. Just one. Did she leave because she stopped loving me? Marisol looked at him for a long time. He watched her jaw tighten. Watched her decide. No, she said. Then why? Another silence. Longer this time. The kind that has a shape to it. And then Marisol said the words that rearranged everything. Elise didn't leave because of you, Adrian. She left because someone made her. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a car started. A bird moved through the gray afternoon sky. Adrian didn't speak. He just stood there, holding those words, feeling the story he had carried for 10 years begin to come apart at the seams, slowly, carefully, the way something breaks when it has been held together by the wrong things for too long. Someone made her. He had spent a decade believing she chose to leave. He was only now beginning to understand what it meant if she hadn't. Adrian didn't sleep. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and turned Marisol's words over and over like a coin he couldn't read. Someone made her. Someone. Not something. Not fear, not doubt, not a change of heart. A person. A specific person who had reached into the life Elise and Adrian were building together and ended it. By 6 in the morning he was dressed. By 7 he was back at the funeral hall, where Marisol and 2 other women were quietly sorting through Elise's belongings. Marisol saw him and didn't look surprised. She handed the box she was holding to the woman beside her and walked over without being asked. I can't tell you who, she said before he could speak. I need you to know that's not me protecting anyone terrible. It's complicated. I know, Adrian said. I'm not asking for that. Not yet. She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a folding table near the window where several cardboard boxes sat open. You can look through what's there. She didn't leave much. He moved to the table. Most of it was ordinary. A coffee mug wrapped in newspaper. A pair of reading glasses. A small stack of paperback books, their spines cracked from use. He went through it slowly, carefully, the way you go through something that belonged to someone you once knew better than anyone. And then he found the photograph. It was tucked inside a paperback, a bookmark that had never been removed. A small print, the edges slightly soft with age. Elise stood in front of a window he didn't recognize, her hands resting on her stomach, her face turned slightly toward the light. She was visibly pregnant. Adrian turned the photograph over. Written in pencil on the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize, was a date. He stared at it. The date was 14 months after she had left him. Which meant, he did the math without wanting to, she had already been gone nearly half a year before this picture was taken. He walked back to Marisol. Who took this? Marisol looked at the photograph. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did, a small, careful closing off. I don't know. Where was it taken? I don't know that either. Marisol. Adrian. Her voice was quiet but firm. I'm telling you the truth. I wasn't there. I didn't know where she was for the first 2 years. She called me when she was ready and not before. He looked at the photograph again. The window behind Elise. The light. The careful way she was standing, like she was trying to look calm for whoever was holding the camera. He put the photograph in his pocket. Marisol didn't stop him. He was standing by the door, coat on, trying to decide what to do next, when he heard a small voice behind him. Are you leaving again? He turned. Eli was sitting on a folding chair near the wall, holding a juice box, watching him with the patient, observant eyes of a child who has spent a lot of time in rooms full of adults. Not yet, Adrian said. Eli nodded, satisfied with that. He looked down at his juice box, poked the straw a few times, then said, without looking up, Uncle Daniel used to bring me here sometimes. To visit Mom. Adrian went very still. Uncle Daniel, he said, keeping his voice easy. He raised me, Eli said simply. Before Mom got sick and came back. He's nice. He makes good breakfast. He considered this. Better than Mom, actually. But don't tell her I said that. He paused, remembering. His face did something complicated that he quickly smoothed over. I keep forgetting. Adrian said nothing. He just waited. They weren't together anymore, Eli added, as if Adrian had asked. Uncle Daniel and Mom. They stopped being married a long time ago. But he still helped. He said that's what you do. Adrian filed every word away and kept his face neutral. He sounds like a good person. He is, Eli said. He cried at the funeral. But he stood in the back so nobody would see. Adrian found Marisol again before he left. Daniel Reyes, he said. Marisol's expression shifted, not guilt, not alarm, but something closer to resignation. Like a door she'd been leaning against had finally been pushed open. He was a family friend, she said. He knew Elise before she met you. They married quietly, a few years after she left. It didn't last long. She paused. He's a good man, Adrian. Whatever you're thinking, he's a good man who was put in a difficult position. What position? That's not mine to say. Then whose is it? She didn't answer. He let it go. For now. He went back to the table by the window. He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew that Marisol's silence had a shape to it, and that shape pointed somewhere he hadn't looked yet. He lifted the last box. Moved a folded cardigan aside. Set down a small picture frame. And there, beneath it, pressed flat against the bottom of the box like it had been placed there deliberately, was an envelope. Plain white. Sealed. No return address. On the front, in Elise's handwriting he recognized after 10 years without hesitation, the way you recognize a voice you loved, were 6 words. For Adrian, if he ever comes looking. He stood there for a long time, holding it in both hands. She had written his name. She had sealed this and kept it and carried it, through everything that happened, through the years and the distance and the silence, on the possibility that he might one day come. She had known him well enough to believe he would. He wasn't sure if that made everything better or worse. He still hadn't opened the envelope. It sat on his desk at home, propped against the lamp, and every time Adrian walked past it he felt the same thing, a pull and a resistance at the same time, like standing at the edge of something high. Elise had written his name on it. She had kept it for years. Whatever was inside had waited this long. He told himself he needed to know more before he read it. He wasn't sure if that was wisdom or fear. His mother called on a Tuesday morning. She didn't mention the funeral in her first sentence, or her second. She asked about a board meeting. She asked about his travel schedule. She was warm and careful and completely ordinary, and Adrian had known Charlotte Voss long enough to understand that the more ordinary she sounded, the more worried she was. He waited her out. Finally, near the end of the call, she said, "I heard you went to pay your respects. For that woman. Elise. That woman." 10 years hadn't softened the way his mother said her name. "I did," Adrian said. A pause. "That was kind of you." "I thought so." Another pause, longer. "Adrian. There's no reason to go digging around in all of that. She's gone. Let the dead rest." He noticed it then, something under the surface of her voice. Not grief. Not guilt. Something closer to urgency. Like someone who had just heard a fire alarm and was trying very hard to walk, not run, to the exit. "I'm not digging," he said. "I paid my respects." "Good." A breath. "Good. That's all it needs to be." They said goodbye. He set the phone down and sat very still. Let the dead rest. His mother had never once, in 10 years, expressed a single soft feeling about Elise Marlowe. And now she was asking him, gently, carefully, with just enough warmth to sound like concern, to stop. He went to see her in person 2 days later. Charlotte met him in the sitting room of the family home, composed as always, dressed well, posture perfect, the version of herself she wore like armor. They talked about nothing for a few minutes. Then Adrian set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "Did you know she had a son?" Charlotte's hands, resting in her lap, went very still. Then, slowly, she reached forward and adjusted the small vase on the table between them. A tiny, unnecessary movement. Her hands were shaking. Not much. Just enough. Adrian had seen his mother face hostile shareholders, difficult lawyers, the death of his father, and her hands had never shaken. Not once. He had always thought of her as someone for whom control was effortless, natural, almost physical. The shaking hands lasted only a moment. She folded them together and looked up at him, and her face was calm again. "I didn't know her well enough to know about her personal life," she said. It wasn't an answer. They both knew it wasn't an answer. And Charlotte knew that Adrian knew, and neither of them said so out loud. He left an hour later with nothing more than he'd arrived with, except for the image of those hands, and the question of what, exactly, had made them tremble. The call from Daniel Reyes came the next morning. Adrian hadn't reached out to him. He didn't know how Daniel had gotten his number, and Daniel didn't explain. "I need to ask you something," Daniel said. His voice was even, measured, a man choosing his words carefully. "Are you planning to keep coming around? To Eli?" "I haven't made any plans," Adrian said honestly. "I need you to stay away from him. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Almost sad. He's had enough disruption. He doesn't need a stranger appearing and disappearing from his life right now." "I understand that." "Do you?" A pause. "Because I saw the way you looked at him. At the funeral. And I need you to understand, whatever you think you know, or whatever you're starting to wonder, Eli is my responsibility. He is not a mystery for you to solve." The line went quiet for a moment. "He asked about you," Daniel added, quieter now. "After you left. He asked if you were coming back." Adrian didn't respond. "That's why I'm calling," Daniel said. And then he hung up. Adrian stood there with the phone in his hand and thought about a 9-year-old boy asking if a stranger was coming back. He thought about what that question meant, and what it cost a child to ask it, and he made a decision. He didn't go back to the funeral hall. He didn't call Marisol. Instead, he made one quiet phone call to a man he trusted, a private investigator named Carr who had done careful, discreet work for Adrian twice before and understood the value of asking questions without leaving traces. "I need the financial history of a man named Daniel Reyes," Adrian said. "Everything going back 15 years. Quietly." Carr called back in 4 days. Adrian listened to the summary without interrupting. Daniel Reyes was clean, modest income, no debt worth noting, no hidden accounts, no offshore activity. An ordinary financial life lived by an ordinary man. Except for one thing. One large payment, almost a decade and a half ago. Transferred from a holding company that, after 2 layers of paperwork, traced back unmistakably to the Voss family accounts. "How large?" Adrian asked. Carr told him. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "And the date?" Carr gave him the date. Adrian didn't move. He just stood at his desk with the phone against his ear and stared at the sealed envelope propped against his lamp, Elise's handwriting, his name, all those years of silence held inside, and felt the ground shift beneath him. The payment had been made to Daniel Reyes exactly 1 month before Elise disappeared. Adrian drove to Daniel Reyes's house with the investigator's report on the passenger seat and Elise's sealed envelope in his jacket pocket. He hadn't planned to confront Daniel directly. But the payment, the amount, the timing, the careful way it had been buried under 2 layers of company paperwork, had made patience feel impossible. Daniel answered the door like he'd been expecting him. They sat in a small living room. Neat, modest, a child's backpack by the door. Eli wasn't home. Daniel had made sure of that, Adrian realized. This conversation had been prepared for. The payment, Adrian said. He didn't dress it up. From my family's accounts, 14 years ago. 1 month before Elise left. I need you to tell me what it was for. Daniel looked at his hands for a long moment. When he looked up, something in his face had changed, the careful composure he'd worn at the funeral, the measured voice on the phone, all of it gone now. What was underneath it looked tired. Old tired. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too many years. They paid me to take care of her, he said. The room went very quiet. Take care of her, Adrian repeated. To make sure she was okay. Somewhere else. Somewhere away from your family and away from you. He said it without anger. Almost without feeling. Like a man reciting something he'd memorized long ago. I didn't want the money. I want you to know that. I'd known Elise for years. We were friends. I would have helped her anyway. But you took it. Yes. And then you married her. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not right away. Not because of the money. I married her because, he stopped. Started again. I felt guilty. For what I'd agreed to. For the part one played. I thought if I was there, if I took care of her and the baby, it would, I don't know. Balance something. The baby, Adrian said. Eli. My son, Daniel said. Quietly. Firmly. The word landed like a door closing. Adrian sat with it. Turned it over. Tried to find the edge where it didn't fit, and couldn't. The timeline worked. Daniel had known Elise before Adrian did. The marriage, the guilt, the way he'd stepped in, it all built into a shape that made a terrible, coherent kind of sense. His family had paid this man. Paid him to take Elise away. And Elise, whether out of fear, or exhaustion, or something he still didn't understand, had let it happen. He left Daniel's house without saying anything else. He went to see his mother that evening. He didn't call ahead. He simply arrived, and Charlotte met him at the door, and when she saw his face she stepped back and let him in without a word. He told her what Daniel had said. All of it. He kept his voice level. He'd learned that from her, after all. When he finished, Charlotte sat down on the sofa, slowly, carefully, like someone suddenly aware of how fragile they are, and she put her face in her hands. She cried. Not the composed, dignified kind. The real kind. Shoulders shaking, breath breaking, the kind of crying that doesn't care who's watching. I thought I was protecting us, she said, when she could speak. The company. The name. I thought, she stopped. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the day I did it. I've known it every day since. Did you know about Eli? A long pause. I suspected, she whispered. I never let myself be sure. Adrian looked at her, this woman who had raised him, who had taught him to be careful and controlled and never let them see you waver, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not rage. Rage would have been easier. He felt grief. For Elise. For the years. For the version of his life that had simply never happened. I need you to leave me alone for a while, he said. I need some time. Charlotte nodded. She didn't argue. She just said, very quietly, I'm sorry, Adrian. I'm so sorry. And for once, the words sounded true. He drove without thinking about where he was going and ended up parked outside the small school where Eli attended aftercare. He didn't go inside. He just sat in the car and watched children come and go and tried to understand how you grieve something you never had. Eli appeared with his backpack and a drawing in his hand, a colorful, chaotic thing that flapped in the breeze. He stopped when he saw Adrian's car. Then he walked over, slow and careful, the way children approach things they're not sure about. Adrian rolled the window down. Hi, Eli said. Hi. Eli looked at him for a moment. Really looked, the way kids do when they haven't learned yet that staring is rude. You look sad, he said. I'm okay. Eli accepted that with a small nod. Then he held up his drawing, a house, a sun, 2 stick figures of different heights. I made this in class. The teacher said to draw someone important. Adrian looked at it. Who's the tall one? He asked. Uncle Daniel, Eli said. Then he pointed at the shorter figure. That's me. He paused. I left space on the other side. In case I think of someone else. Adrian didn't trust his voice, so he said nothing. Eli folded the drawing carefully and put it in his backpack. Then he looked up, head tilted, with a question that came out small and simple and completely unguarded. Did you used to love my mom? That night, Adrian sat at his desk for a long time. The truth was settled now. His family had paid Daniel to take Elise away. Daniel had married her out of guilt. Eli was Daniel's son. Charlotte had cried and confirmed it. It was over. It was answered. It was the worst version of the story, cruel and clean and final. He should put the envelope away. There was no reason to read it now. He opened it anyway. The paper inside was folded once. Elise's handwriting, careful, small, the way she wrote when she was choosing every word. He unfolded it. Read the first line. And the truth he had just finished grieving came apart in his hands. Daniel is not the father. I need you to understand why I let you believe he was. The letter was 4 pages long. Adrian read it at his desk, slowly, without moving. Outside, the city was quiet. Inside, with every paragraph, the version of the truth he had just finished grieving, the one where Daniel was the father, where Charlotte had simply paid to clear the path, dissolved completely. Elise hadn't written the letter to explain herself. She'd written it so that if he ever came looking, he would understand what she had been up against. And it was worse than anything he had imagined. The money, she wrote, was never the threat. Charlotte had offered money first. Elise had refused it. She had been frightened. Yes, Adrian's family was powerful and she was not, but she had loved Adrian, and she had been carrying his child, and she had believed, until the very last moment, that love was enough to hold against all of it. Then Charlotte came back a second time. No money that time. No lawyers. Just Charlotte, alone, with a single piece of paper and a very quiet voice. The paper was a letter to immigration enforcement. Already written. Already signed. It named Elise's sister, Marisol, who had been living in the country on an expired visa for 3 years, a fact no one outside the family had known, a fact Charlotte had clearly paid someone to find. Charlotte had placed the letter on the table between them and said, I will file this tomorrow unless you're gone by the end of the week. Elise was gone in 3 days. She didn't tell Adrian because she knew he would fight it. She knew he would go to his mother, threaten, demand, and Charlotte would simply file the letter anyway, and Marisol would be gone, and Elise would have lost her sister trying to save a life that Charlotte had already decided to destroy. So she left. She asked Daniel, the only person she trusted who was outside the Voss family's reach, to help her. She let him be named on the documents. She spent years building something small and safe and entirely out of Charlotte's view. She had protected Marisol. She had protected the baby. She had let Adrian believe she simply chose to walk away, because the alternative was watching him fight a battle he couldn't win against a woman who had already decided how it would end. Adrian set the letter down. He sat very still for a long time. He called Daniel that night. Not to accuse. Not to confront. He simply said, I read the letter, and waited. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I wondered when that would happen. You were never his father. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't treat it like one. No, he said. And his voice, when it came, was thick with something that had been held back for years. I tried to be a good one. I want you to know that. Whatever else, I tried. I know, Adrian said. She never stopped. Daniel's voice broke, just slightly. He pulled it back. She never stopped hoping you'd find out eventually. She just also never stopped being afraid of what it would cost you if you did. Adrian thought about that for a moment. About Elise carrying all of it, the secret, the fear, the love, and choosing to carry it alone rather than let it damage him. Thank you, he said quietly. For taking care of them both. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Eli was at Daniel's house when Adrian arrived the next afternoon. He was in the backyard, kicking a ball against the fence in a patient, rhythmic way, the kind of thing children do when they're keeping themselves company. He looked up when he saw Adrian. He didn't run over. He just watched, waiting to see what kind of visit this was going to be. Adrian sat on the back steps. After a moment, Eli came and sat beside him, close but not touching, ball tucked under one arm. They watched the yard for a while. Are you okay? Eli asked. Getting there, Adrian said. Eli nodded seriously. Uncle Daniel says that's what grief does. It takes a while. He's right. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, did you read Mom's letter? Adrian looked at him. You knew about it? She told me she wrote one. Before she got really sick. He poked at a crack in the step with his finger. She said if the right person ever came, they'd find it. She said she wanted them to understand. He looked up. Was it you? The right person? The weight of 10 years, every missed morning, every birthday uncounted, every version of this boy's life Adrian hadn't been part of, pressed down all at once. Yeah, he said. I think it was me. Eli seemed satisfied with that. He went back to looking at the yard. A small, uncomplicated nod. Adrian went to his mother's house that evening with the letter in his hand. He didn't raise his voice. He read her the parts about Marisol, about the immigration threat, about the paper placed on the table, and he watched Charlotte's face as he did. She didn't deny it. She sat with her hands in her lap and let the words fall over her, and when he finished she was very pale and very still. You threatened her sister, he said. You threatened to have her deported. That's what you did. Yes. And Daniel. He agreed to lie because Elise asked him to. Because she had no other choice. Yes. And Eli, his voice caught for just a moment. He pushed through it. Eli is my son. Charlotte closed her eyes. Yes, she whispered. The room was silent. Adrian stood there, 10 years of loss compressed into a single breath, and he waited for his mother to say something, anything, that would let him understand how she had lived with this. Charlotte opened her eyes. And she said the one thing he had not been prepared for. You don't understand. Her voice was low. Unsteady. Not defensive, something else. Something that looked, underneath all the composure, like fear. I wasn't protecting the company. I wasn't protecting the family name. She looked at him directly. I was protecting you, from something your father did. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car outside his mother's house for almost an hour after she said it, staring at the steering wheel, turning those words over until they lost their shape. I was protecting you, from something your father did. His father had been dead for 4 years. A man Adrian had spent his whole life measuring himself against, demanding, careful, proud of the family name above almost everything else. He had never been warm. But Adrian had never thought of him as someone who needed to be hidden from. He went back inside. Charlotte was still in the sitting room, exactly where he'd left her. She hadn't moved to make tea or turn on a lamp. She was just sitting in the dimming light, waiting. Tell me, Adrian said. She looked at him for a long moment, the way someone looks when they've been rehearsing a conversation for years and now that it's here, they don't want to start it. Your father threatened to disown you, she said. If you married Elise. I know that. He made that clear while he was alive. Adrian kept his voice steady. That's not what you meant. Charlotte looked down at her hands. He had an affair, she said. Years before you were born. It lasted longer than it should have. He ended it, eventually, and I chose to stay, and we never spoke of it again. She paused. I thought it was buried. I thought it would stay buried. Elise found out. Charlotte nodded slowly. She wasn't looking for it. She was visiting the house once, early in your relationship, when I was out. She found some old letters your father had kept. Letters he should have destroyed. A long pause. She came to me privately. She wasn't threatening me. She just wanted to know if I was all right. Adrian stared at her. She came to you to ask if you were all right? She was that kind of person, Charlotte said quietly. Something in her voice cracked, just slightly. I know you know that. He did. God, he did. Your father found out she'd seen the letters, Charlotte continued. He didn't handle it the way I hoped he would. He told me that if Adrian married that woman, she would eventually use what she knew. That she'd hold it over the family for the rest of our lives. Charlotte's voice went flat. He gave me a choice. Make her go away, or he would disown you completely. Pull your inheritance, remove you from the company, cut you off entirely. The room was very quiet. You believed him, Adrian said. I knew him, Charlotte said. There's a difference. Adrian left without another word. He needed air. He needed to think somewhere that wasn't inside the walls where his father's portrait still hung in the hallway. He drove to Marisol's apartment. It was late, but she answered on the first knock, like she'd been awake. Like she'd been waiting for this part too. Did you know, he asked. About my father? The affair? The letters? Elise told me everything, Marisol said. Eventually. She stepped back from the door. Come in. They sat at her kitchen table. Marisol made tea, neither of them drank. She kept a journal, Marisol said. From the day Charlotte first came to see her, she wrote down everything. Every conversation. Every threat. Every detail. She got up and went to the hallway closet, reached up to the very top shelf, behind a box, and came back with a small, cloth-covered notebook. She set it on the table between them. She wanted there to be a record, Marisol said. In case something happened to her. In case someone needed to know the truth and she wasn't around to tell it. Adrian looked at the journal. Elise's name was written inside the front cover in her small, careful handwriting. Daniel called me this afternoon, Marisol said carefully. He's worried about what you'll do with all of this. About Eli. What does he think I'll do? He thinks you might want to make it public. The affair. The cover-up. Your family's involvement. She paused. He thinks that if the truth comes out in the wrong way, it could be very disruptive for a 9-year-old boy who has already lost his mother and doesn't yet understand who you are to him. Adrian looked at the journal. Daniel's right to be worried. I know. Marisol folded her hands on the table. I just wanted you to hear it clearly before you read that. He read the journal at home, alone, starting from the first page. It was exactly what Marisol had described, a careful, precise record of everything. Dates. Times. What Charlotte had said. What Elise had felt. How she had weighed every option and arrived, slowly, at the terrible conclusion that leaving was the only move that protected everyone she loved. She wrote about Adrian often. Not with bitterness. With something much harder to read. She wrote about watching him from a distance in the years after, through mutual connections, through news. She wrote that she had nearly called him 4 separate times and stopped herself each time for the same reason, that calling would bring him back into a situation that his father could still weaponize. She had protected him. Even from a distance. Even at a cost he hadn't known she was paying. He read through to the final pages. The entries near the end were shorter, written, he realized, during her illness, when energy was limited and time was not. The second-to-last entry was about Eli. About hoping he would be okay. About trusting Daniel. About the envelope she had prepared for Adrian. Then the final page. 1 paragraph. Written in a slightly shakier hand than the rest. He read it once. Then again. The sentence in the middle of the paragraph changed every assumption he had been quietly making about his mother, about her motives, about what she had known, about the line between cruelty and desperation. He sat at his desk for a long time. Outside, the city went about its night. Car lights moved across the ceiling. Somewhere, a child he now knew was his son was asleep in a house watched over by a man who had chosen kindness when he didn't have to. And Adrian sat with what Elise had written, and understood, for the first time, that the story he thought he'd been reading had a different center than he'd believed. The sentence on the final page of Elise's journal was short. 11 words. Written in a hand that was tired but deliberate, the handwriting of someone who knew their time was limited and had chosen these words carefully, above all others, to leave last. Adrian read it 3 times. Then he closed the journal, set it on the desk, and sat in the silence of his apartment for a very long time. He had come into this week believing one thing about his mother. Then another. Then another. Each version had felt true when he found it. Each one had been replaced by something harder. This was the last one. He could feel it in his chest the way you feel the end of something, not with relief, but with the particular weight of finally understanding something you cannot unknow. He went back to the beginning of the journal and read it again. All of it. This time looking for what he'd missed. It was there, in the earlier pages. Small things. Details he had read past the first time because he'd been looking for facts, not feelings. Charlotte had come to see Elise 3 times before the final meeting with the immigration letter. Not once. 3 times. The first visit, according to Elise's careful notes, wasn't a threat at all. It was almost a warning. She told me to be careful with him, Elise had written. Not with Adrian. With his father. She said it like she was afraid to be more specific. I didn't understand what she meant then. The second visit, Charlotte had asked Elise directly whether Adrian's father had ever spoken to her alone. Whether he had ever made her uncomfortable. Elise had written that she'd said no, because at the time, it was true. It was only at the third visit, after Elise had found the letters, that Charlotte's behavior had shifted from warning to desperate action. The threat about Marisol's visa. The urgency. The way she had looked, Elise wrote, like a woman who had run out of any other option. I think she was terrified, Elise had written, not of what I knew, but of what he might do once he found out I knew it. Adrian put the journal down. His father hadn't just had an affair. His father had done something to Charlotte, something that had taught her, years before Elise came into their lives, exactly what this man was capable of when he felt threatened. And when Elise accidentally walked into possession of that secret, Charlotte hadn't moved against her out of cruelty. She had moved fast, and badly, and desperately, because she knew what his father would do if she didn't. She had been trying to protect Elise from a man she had spent decades being afraid of herself. The cruelty and the protection had been the same act. The final journal entry was dated 8 months before Elise died. Adrian read it slowly. She wrote that she had made peace with most of it. With leaving. With the years of distance. With the choices she had made for Marisol's sake, and for the baby's sake, and, she admitted it quietly, in the second paragraph, for Adrian's sake too. Because she had known, by the end, enough about his father to understand that Adrian had been living inside a story with a shadow in it he couldn't see. She wrote that she forgave Charlotte. Not easily. Not all at once. But genuinely, the kind of forgiveness that comes when you finally understand that the person who hurt you was also afraid. And then, near the bottom of the page, in the clearest handwriting in the entire journal. Eli is Adrian's son. He has always been Adrian's son. I need whoever is reading this to understand that I never doubted it for a single day. I kept it from him because I thought I was keeping him safe. I know now I was also keeping myself safe, from the pain of a conversation I was too afraid to have. That's the part I'm still working on forgiving in myself. Adrian closed the journal. He sat with his hand flat on the cover for a moment, like he was trying to feel something through it. Then he got up, put on his coat, and drove to Daniel's house. Eli was in the front yard when he arrived, crouched over something in the grass, an insect, it turned out, which he was observing with the focused intensity that 9-year-olds bring to things adults walk past without noticing. He looked up when Adrian's car pulled in. He stood, dusted off his knees, and walked over in the unhurried way he always moved, like a child who had learned early that rushing things didn't change how they arrived. Adrian got out of the car. He didn't have a plan for this moment. He hadn't prepared words. He just stood there, looking at this boy, at the angle of his jaw, at the way he held himself, at 10 years of a life that had happened without him, and felt something open up in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Eli looked at him carefully. "You look different," Eli said. "Do I?" "Yeah." He considered this with the seriousness he applied to most things. "Like something happened." "Something did," Adrian said. Eli nodded slowly, like that made sense. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back up. "Direct. Uncomplicated. Are you sad or happy right now?" Adrian looked at him. This boy. This specific boy, with his blazer sleeves pushed up at a funeral and his drawings with space left on the side and his patient, steady eyes that had somehow already decided, against all reasonable evidence, that Adrian was worth waiting for. He crouched down so they were the same height. He opened his mouth to answer. And for the first time in 10 years, he genuinely didn't know which one was true. Both words lived in his chest at exactly the same time, pressed against each other, inseparable, the grief and the love so tangled together that pulling one free would have destroyed the other. So he just stayed there, eye level with his son, and let the question sit between them in the afternoon light. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell us what you're feeling right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there when the final chapters arrive. Adrian went to see his mother the next morning without calling ahead. Charlotte answered the door herself. She was dressed, but barely, no jewelry, hair not yet done, the version of herself she only showed when she wasn't expecting anyone. She looked at him standing on the step and something in her face shifted. Not fear. Something older than fear. She stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table. Not the formal sitting room this time. The kitchen, where the light was ordinary and there was nowhere to perform. Adrian put Elise's journal on the table between them. Charlotte looked at it. She didn't reach for it. "She wrote about your visits," Adrian said. Charlotte went very still. "All of them," he said. A long silence. Outside, a bird moved through the garden. Charlotte looked at the journal, and then at her hands, and then at some point past Adrian's shoulder where the window showed the morning. "How many times?" he asked quietly. "Every year," she said. "From the second year after she left. Until she got sick and came back." Adrian absorbed that. 8 years of secret visits. 8 years of his mother sitting across from the woman she had forced away, and saying nothing to him. Not a word. "Why?" he asked. "Because I owed her that much." Charlotte's voice was flat. Not defensive. Just honest, in the particular way that people are honest when they've stopped trying to manage how they're perceived. "I did a terrible thing, Adrian. I knew it was terrible when I did it. But your father was. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't act. And by the time the fear passed, the damage was already done." She paused. "Visiting her was the only thing I could think of that was actually useful." "Did she know you were sending money? For Eli's school?" Charlotte blinked. "Just slightly." "She told you about that?" She wrote it down. A breath. "She asked me to stop, the second year. I kept doing it anyway. I set it up through a trust so she couldn't send it back." A pause. "She stopped trying to return it after the 3rd year." Adrian thought about Eli. About 9 years of school fees arriving from a name Eli didn't know, paid by a grandmother who had never been introduced as one. "She never told him," Adrian said. "No. She didn't want him to carry the weight of it." Charlotte looked at the table. She was very protective of what he had to know and what he didn't. She thought children should be allowed to be children for as long as possible. Something about that landed quietly, without drama. It was the most human thing Adrian had heard in days, and it had come from his mother's mouth, about the woman his mother had driven away. He didn't know what to do with that yet. So he moved forward. He found Daniel that afternoon at the small repair shop where he worked 2 days a week, a backroom job, quiet, the kind that left space for thinking. Daniel came out when he heard Adrian's voice, wiping his hands on a cloth, and they stood in the narrow corridor between shelves. Charlotte was visiting her, Adrian said. Every year. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. Elise told me. And you never. What was I going to do with that information? Daniel said. Not unkindly. Tell you? You didn't know Eli existed. Telling you Charlotte was visiting a woman you didn't know was a mother would have been. He stopped. It would have opened everything before Elise was ready. Adrian let that go. He looked at Daniel for a moment, at the quiet, steady presence of this man who had built a life around someone else's emergency and never complained about the shape of it. "I need to ask you something," Adrian said. Daniel waited. "Why did you really agree to it?" "Not the official reason. The real one." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the cloth in his hands, folded it once, set it on a shelf. "I loved her," he said simply. "Not the way she loved you. I knew that from the start. But I loved her the way you love someone when you've known them a long time and you understand them completely and you'd rather be close to them on any terms than not close at all." He said it without embarrassment. Without asking for anything. "When she needed someone, I was there. That's the whole story." Adrian had come ready to feel complicated things about Daniel Reyes. He found, standing in that corridor, that he didn't. He felt something closer to gratitude, the specific, humbling kind that comes when you realize someone quietly held together something you should have been there to hold yourself. "Thank you," he said. For the second time. This time, Daniel nodded. He went back to his mother's house that evening. Charlotte was in the sitting room. She had pulled Elise's journal closer while he'd been gone. It had moved a few inches on the table, but she hadn't opened it. Just sat with it nearby. Adrian sat across from her and they were quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable. The kind that exists between two people who have finally stopped pretending. "I don't forgive you yet," Adrian said. "I want to be honest about that." "I know. But I understand more than I did." He paused. "I understand that you were trying to protect her. Even if the way you did it was wrong. Even if it cost everyone something they can't get back." Charlotte looked at him. Her eyes were steady, but tired, the tiredness of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for so long they've forgotten what it felt like not to. "She was a good person," Charlotte said quietly. "Better than I deserved from her. She forgave me. I'm not sure I've forgiven myself." Adrian nodded. He didn't rush it. He didn't offer easy comfort. Some things shouldn't be made comfortable too quickly. He reached for the journal. He was about to stand when Charlotte spoke again. "There's one more person who knew the truth the whole time." Her voice was careful. Deliberate. "He's been waiting for you to ask." Adrian looked at her. "Who?" he said. Charlotte held his gaze. And for the first time since the funeral, she looked not like someone confessing, but like someone finally, after a very long time, releasing something they were never meant to carry alone. His name was Gerald Holt. He was 73 years old, semi-retired, and had been Adrian's father's closest business partner for over 2 decades. Charlotte had given Adrian his number without explanation, just the name and the words, "He's been waiting." Adrian called him that same evening. Gerald picked up on the second ring. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded, if anything, relieved. "I wondered when this call would come," Gerald said. "I've been wondering for about 9 years." They met the next morning at a small cafe Gerald had chosen, neutral ground, quiet, the kind of place where conversations don't carry. Gerald was a tall man gone soft with age, with careful eyes that had seen a great deal and learned to be still about most of it. He ordered coffee. He wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at Adrian directly. "Your father's affair," Adrian said. "Tell me what you know." "Everything," Gerald said. "I was the one who helped him end it. I was the one who helped him bury it." He paused. "I'm not proud of that. I want you to know that before anything else." "Who was she?" "A woman who worked briefly with the company. It lasted about 2 years. When your father ended it, she threatened to go public. Your father panicked." Gerald looked at his coffee. "I helped him manage it. We paid her to sign an NDA and leave quietly. It worked. And then about a year later, Elise Marlowe came into your life and accidentally found the letters your father had been foolish enough to keep. And my father felt exposed all over again." "He didn't trust her," Gerald said simply. "He told your mother Elise was a liability. That she'd use what she knew." A pause. "Your mother didn't want to believe him. But she also knew what your father was capable of when he felt cornered. She'd seen it firsthand." He looked up. "She wasn't protecting the family name, Adrian. She was trying to prevent your father from doing something worse." Adrian sat with that. The last missing piece, small and heavy, dropping into place. His father had been the threat all along. Not an abstract one, a specific, documented danger that Charlotte had spent years managing quietly, trying to keep contained, trying to protect everyone around it without ever letting anyone know it existed. She had made terrible choices. But she had been navigating something real. "Did Elise ever reach out to you?" Adrian asked. "No," Gerald said. "She had more integrity than most people I've met. She never used what she knew. Not once." He looked at Adrian steadily. She was a good person who got caught between bad circumstances and a frightened woman and a man who didn't deserve either of them. Adrian nodded once. There was nothing else to say. Gerald had given him the last piece of the story, not to excuse anyone, but simply to complete it. He thanked Gerald. He left. The story was finally, entirely, closed. The legal process took 3 weeks. Adrian worked with his lawyers quietly and carefully, making sure everything was done in a way that protected Eli from disruption. No court drama, no public statements until the paperwork was settled. Daniel agreed to everything without resistance. He sat across from Adrian in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon and signed where he was asked to sign, and when it was done he looked across the table and said, "Take care of him." "I will," Adrian said. Daniel nodded. And that was the end of his obligation to a lie he had never wanted to carry. Charlotte came to Adrian's apartment the evening the paperwork was finalized. She brought nothing. She just stood in his living room, and they looked at each other, and for the first time neither of them was managing what the other would think. "I want to tell you something about her," Adrian said. "Something from the journal. Something she wrote about you." Charlotte went very still. He told her about the final entry. About Elise's forgiveness, the real kind, the earned kind, the kind that had taken years to arrive and had arrived anyway. He told her that Elise had written about Charlotte with complexity, not cruelty. That she had understood, eventually, what Charlotte had been trapped inside. Charlotte sat down on the sofa. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. "She was better than me," she said quietly. "In some ways," Adrian said. "You're better than you think, in others." He paused. "She trusted you to keep funding Eli's school for 9 years. She stopped trying to send it back. That means something." Charlotte looked at him. Something in her face loosened, not dramatically. Just quietly. The way a knot releases when the right amount of pressure is finally gone. They talked about Elise for an hour. Really talked, not around her, not about what she had meant to the situation, but about who she was. Her laugh. The way she made tea. The small, careful way she'd asked Charlotte if she was all right the day she found the letters, because that was simply the kind of person she'd been. It was the first honest conversation they'd ever had about her. It was long overdue. And it was enough, for now, to begin. He told Eli on a Saturday afternoon, at Daniel's kitchen table, with Daniel present because that felt right. He didn't use complicated words. He said that he and Eli's mom had loved each other a long time ago, and that some hard things had happened that kept them apart, and that he had only just learned that Eli was his son. He said he was sorry he hadn't been there. He said he wanted to be there now, if Eli would let him. Eli listened to all of this with his characteristic stillness. He looked at the table. He looked at Daniel, who gave him a small nod. He looked back at Adrian. "So you're my dad," he said. "Yes." Eli considered this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. Then, "Can I think about what to call you for a little bit?" "Take all the time you need," Adrian said. Eli nodded. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Actually, I already know." He looked at Adrian. "Can I just call you Dad?" Adrian's throat tightened. He didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. Eli accepted that with a small, satisfied nod of his own, the way children accept things that feel right, and reached for his juice box like the most important question of his life had simply been resolved. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Adrian took Eli to the cemetery. They walked slowly. Eli held a small bunch of flowers he had chosen himself, yellow ones, because, he explained, his mom had liked yellow. They stood at Elise's grave for a while without talking. Eli set the flowers down carefully, adjusted them once, and stepped back. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and took out the envelope. White, slightly worn at the edges now, his name in Elise's handwriting on the front. Empty. He had read everything inside it. He had understood everything it asked him to understand. He set it gently against the base of the headstone, beside the flowers. A decade of silence, finally answered. Return to the person it had always belonged to. Eli looked at the envelope, then at Adrian. "What was in it?" he asked. "Everything I needed to know," Adrian said. Eli thought about that for a moment. Then he reached out and took Adrian's hand, small and warm, the same hand he had offered at a funeral not so long ago, and held it without saying anything else. Adrian looked at Elise's name carved in the stone. He thought about the Tuesday evening in her kitchen, the ring, the yes. He thought about everything that had been taken, and everything that had somehow, improbably, survived. Then he looked down at the boy beside him. And he held on. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments what moment hit you hardest. We read every one. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one.